That's the problem with positive thinking. It really screws your head up because it makes you think, oh, I don't want to look at all that. If you're not looking at that and mitigating it, your brain is going to intuitively bring it up to make sure you're thinking about it, because that's what anxiety is and fears are. Foresight is better than hindsight. You're not going to plan every detail, possibly, but you can know that the more you put into the details, the higher the probability. The master is the one who focuses on every detail. You know, is Phelps, the swimmer, 22 gold medals, 22 medals anyway. He used to visualize in his mind's eye his ideal swim, and he would take everything, and I mean, every movement, every stroke, everything, every possible obstacle. If there's a disturbance in the water, if there's anything that ever happened, he thought, how would I handle that? And how do I use it to my advantage? And if this happens, how do I use it to my advantage? How do I reduce this probability? He thought things in advance, and he was the most medaled individual, but he saw it in his mind's eye. So planning the business and making sure you think through and make sure that there's a real need. I'm amazed at how many entrepreneurs go out there, have a fantasy, borrow money, take all the risks on a fantasy they haven't even found out if there's a real need for. They're projecting self-righteously an assumption that they know what the market needs instead of finding out what the market's asking for. And if they do, they're going to end up flopping because they're going after something that nobody wants. And they're having to push marketing and cost, and they're burning through cash flow. And then they burden themselves, and they get stressed, and then they're out of their executive center, and then they're into impulses, and they look for a magic bullet to save them, and then they go out under. It's wiser to be patient and to perceive in advance and make sure that you really have a market. Make sure there's a market out there, or make sure you're doing things to create the market and plan it out. When I opened up my practice, I had a business plan, and I went through about probably 40 plans of other people and took the best of everybody else's plan and integrated it into my plan and thought of stuff that wasn't even in those plans. And then went to the bank, and I got my money from the bank. But in the process of doing it, I had in my mind a clear idea of what I was going to do the moment I opened up my office. Now, there were some things I didn't anticipate, and some things that I anticipated so well that it exceeded my expectations the results. But I thought it through, and I took out the risk. Our anxiety, our phobias, are a result of our philias, and our philias are fantasies, and therefore we create a nightmare. Every fantasy has a nightmare. Every philia, phobia. Every relation, depression. And so anytime you're setting something and you haven't thought through what are all the downsides and meditated on all the evils, as they call it, and think of all the downside, what all could go wrong, that's the problem with positive thinking. It really screws your head up because it makes you think, oh, I don't want to look at all that. If you're not looking at that and mitigating it, your brain is going to intuitively bring it up to make sure you're thinking about it, because that's what anxiety is and fears are. Those fears are feedback to you that you're setting a fantasy without thinking and don't have a plan. And so you have an anxiety. What could happen? Fear is an assumption that you're about to experience in the future more drawbacks and benefits. So if you haven't anticipated them, thought of how you would use them to your advantage, find out the upsides to it and how to mitigate them and reduce those probabilities, then they're going to show up in your mind to let you know you're setting a fantasy and you're afraid to face those. Because sometimes you're afraid to face them because you might not want to act on the fantasy, but you need to do that, or otherwise you'll go after a fantasy and then flop, and then your fear came near. Wiser to think in advance and get mentorship and pre-plan. And if you're not clear about it, get some advice, read some books, get some mentorships, ask questions, do these types of these webinars. But make sure in your mind you've got a clear pathway where you see, and make sure there's a demand for your service. And then when you know there's a demand, you don't have anxiety. You only have anxiety for the things you didn't anticipate, and you're anticipating. And by the way, there's no fear of the unknown. There's fear of what you're anticipating because you haven't planned. There's no fear of the unknown. There's fear of the content in your mind that you're assuming could happen that you don't have mitigated. And you don't know how to use it and turn it into on the way, or how to reduce the probability of it. So you didn't plan. And the moment you plan it out and think, okay, if this happens, here's what I'll do, you don't have a fear about it. That fear's gone. And you think, okay, what else do I have an anxiety about? Well, this could happen. Great. How do I do it? I go and find out if there's really a need for that product. If I do, I tweak the product. If it doesn't, and if I now know what it is, now I don't have the anxiety because I know I've got a demand. So all of your fears are your friends. All of your self-doubts are your friends. They're feedback to let you know you haven't planned an objective, you haven't strategized it out, you're going on a whim with some degree of upsides without downsides, you're not anticipating those, and you don't have a real objective. Again, objectivity means even-minded, not positive thinking. I know I beat this dead horse, but I get so many people coming in from the positive thinking movement that are anxious and sabotaging and frightened and then hesitating and then flopping because they don't use their objective mind. The executive part of the brain is there for a reason. Your amygdala is a subcortical area of the brain that we have that's in common with the animals. Our executive center is something we have that gives meaning and purpose and direction and inspiration and planning, and we create things. Elon Musk just made his own spacecraft working with NASA to go up to the space station. That was 100,000 people thinking of every possible thing that could go wrong, plan it out, mitigate it, precision it, practice it, perform it. That's why they're successful at doing it, achieved it. It's not because they winged it, not because they had fantasies, not because they had positive thinking. It's because they thought of everything and they dealt with every single thing that could go wrong and they were prepared for it. If you do that, you're going to go on and you're going to launch to the space station. You'll be in the stratosphere with your achievements. Thank you for joining me for this presentation today. If you found value out of the presentation, please go below and please share your comments. We certainly appreciate that feedback. And be sure to subscribe and hit the notification icons. That way I can bring more content to you and share more to help you maximize your life. I look forward to our next presentation. Thank you so much for joining.